Good morning, everybody. Hi, well done. How many people made the keynote this morning? Good. I think Joanna did an incredible job, so I'm glad that some of you didn't make that, so I don't have that kind of immediate comparison. And thank you very much for getting here so promptly. We are going to try to keep pretty prompt throughout the whole day, or rather, I'll do my best to disturb that pattern, and the team here will try and keep us on track. So my name's Richard Muirhead. People, of course, keep asking me whether I have anything to do with or any knowledge of Charlie Muirhead, and the answer is I have no idea who this guy is, but he did just call me up and suggest that I come down here today. So I'm going to kick off with, and we didn't actually quite do this on the main stage, so this means it should be relevant to everybody, with just a little, a couple of thoughts on the day and an introduction. And then I have the pleasure of talking to you a little bit about ultimately what's an optimistic view of the future, but it builds upon some of the points that Joanna was just making. Firstly, I'm partner at a venture firm called Fabric Ventures. We're actually kind of 100% focused on this whole area of decentralized data networks powered by blockchain. And we think that's relevant both in terms of kind of what we're funding, but also how we're put together. That's actually quite a serious adaptation for many industries, including venture capital, to work out what this means. But we do think that, as we're going to talk about, this is the start of something pretty big. I've been in the space for 5 years. And the team has been investing for the last year in more than a dozen different projects. We're excited by it because at its heart, it's all about trust. And it's all about trust that can enable collaboration. And then beyond that, it's all become about tokens. And tokens can enable incentivization. And these two taken together are an incredibly potent combination for getting people both individually, but also together to do incredible things. Over this next couple of days, we're going to have around 40 speakers. We've got people from kind of 3 continents, including Chris Berniski, Mike Novogratz. We've got folks from the original team at the Ethereum project. We've got folks from the EU Parliament, Thomson Reuters. And we're going to be looking at questions of, where are we in this particular part of the technological revolution? What are the challenges in terms of the technical side and scaling and making things work? That's important. But what are the challenges as well in terms of education and regulation? I think probably importantly addressing the question, why does this all matter? And how, in what sense does it matter? Are there urgent questions to be addressed here? Is this an imperative that we focus on it right now? And how grave are the consequences? So that's going to be the agenda. I hope that you can join as much of it as possible. I also hope that, whilst we're going to have a kind of free-flowing audience here, that maybe there's a chance for some participation. And I will do my best to encourage that as we bring moderators and so forth onto the stage. Okay, so I think I need to now use 2 different clickers. I need to use that clicker to introduce myself, which is great. And then I need to use this clicker, hopefully, to switch to my deck in a second. Well, so we've done that bit, so we can switch right to my deck. This is fantastic. So I have a clicker and a mic. Is this going to work? I feel a little bit like I'm juggling already. It's been so popular with the number of speakers and the rest of it, and there's so many people turning around. The headphone sets are in very short supply. Plus, I prefer sort of feeling that old school look with a mic in your hand. So I'm gonna charge right in now and just say a few words, which I'm going to try to compress probably now into about 12 minutes. Would that be about right? Oops. Has this gone to sleep? Here we go. There we go. Got it. So we're going to scamper through a few different questions. So one question would be, how do we... These are actually topics that preoccupy this movement of decentralization. And we wrote a blog post about this, the kind of blooming of the sovereign individual. So how do we unlock the power of the individual? How do we ensure that this tech benefits us more than it endangers us? And how do we know when it's got so good that, in fact, our emotions are being manipulated and we might be susceptible to unwittingly making decisions that perhaps weren't even good for us? So, does anyone guess what this is a picture of? It's a metaphor, it's an introductory metaphor to another metaphor for how blockchains may work together, but no, it's not a blockchain. Anybody? The Large Hadron Collider, exactly. So it's one of the kind of top 10 most complicated and sophisticated pieces of technology that have been built ever. But it's effectively built on a sort of centralized basis. And I would like to suggest that actually even more sophisticated and more of a triumph is the innovation of the city, which obviously has evolved over time, but it's actually a much more decentralized function. There are many, many different networks within a city that work kind of reasonably, I shall say, seamlessly, but to achieve incredible things. And cities have got a bad rap, urban life, it's so bad, but actually on many measures, it's more efficient, more healthy than lives lived in other parts of the country. So I think it's an interesting model for thinking about the kind of networks you can build with blockchain technology. And why is this coming about? We sort of see three trends in parallel kicking off. One, everybody will be familiar with the Cambridge Analytica debacle, fiasco, whatever. Look, they've been singled out and perhaps for good reason, but as alluded to by Jana earlier this morning, we went out there pursuing this myth that algorithms could deliver everything to us, and we got kind of what we were looking for. And we now need to think carefully about how we push it forward from there. Second thing that's going on here is that there's been a technical innovation around delivering consensus or enabling people in a network to reach an agreement between each other on a peer-to-peer basis without trusted third parties. Those, the use of the consensus algorithms as demonstrated in, by Satoshi in the context of the Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain. The third thing that's been going on here, and that's not going to be very helpful. The third thing that's going to be going on here is that I'm going to change this while I talk to you, is that we actually have the ability to move to a more inclusive form of capitalism. And what I mean by that is that the advent of the token sale has made it possible to actually, turning this off, there we go, never, good. Get this back. Almost seamless. And the token sale enables you to, you can put up an Ether or a Bitcoin address on a website, propose something that you're doing, and should we say, leaving regulation to one side for one moment, you can do an incredibly low friction form of fundraising for hopefully fantastic projects that will move the world forward. But not just that, but you can also, you have the ability to issue these tokens to people within the networks that you're building, different stakeholders, in a more equitable manner, but in a way that will also help get these networks off the ground. So we feel that's actually a move towards a more kind of benevolent, inclusive capitalism, if you will, a kind of capitalism 3.0. And it's been built on, in part, and inspired by the whole open source software movement, that has been building now for like half a century or more, back to the very earliest days when it was a highly romantic movement. People were in love with creating great code and setting it free and doing that for the good of the planet, through the phase when, including my partner Monty Vedenius from OpenOcean, who went out and built MySQL and built a billion-dollar software company on the basis of the service and support. But folks discovered that actually that service and support model for open source was perhaps of limited effectiveness, and then we moved into the era we're now in, and then in the era that we're now in, we have these closed networks that have been built by the familiar major players, Facebook, Amazon, eBay, Netflix, etc., which is an awful lot of open source software behind a closed cloud service, using quite often our data and software that isn't actually owned or proprietary to those platforms to generate many trillions of dollars of market capitalization, perhaps even soon, of course, $1 trillion market cap in one company. But the fourth version of this collaboration, when you add the incentives and the consensus and the coordination, can deliver something quite remarkable. And we see it as feeding into something that should be viewed as actually the successor to this previous era of web and cloud computing, the era of decentralization. The role of tokens in that era may not be clear to everybody, but effectively it grants the right of the use of some of the resources in this decentralized computing architecture. And a key characteristic of those tokens is that they are effectively infinitely programmable. And so this is important when you're thinking about how do you create this connection between an individual or a machine and something it may own or want to have access to. But it's also important when you're thinking about how do you design the token economics for how do you solve the cold start problem or bootstrap these networks into operation. Because of that flexibility, and perhaps because of my sort of optimistic perspective on the world, having come through a kind of quite entrepreneurial background, I have shifted over time to become increasingly you could say a token maximalist, and that stepping back from it a little bit, I very much am reminded of around 95 when I was kind of moonlighting from the first sort of proper job I ever had, and thinking about which software company it would be good to start. And it was at the beginning of the revolution known as the web and the digitization of content. And what we feel is that actually tokenization has the same relationship to ownership as digitization has to content. And we saw what happened to movies and music and over the last couple of decades. If we can imagine what's going to happen to the say personal data and how you own that and manage it, or real estate and how you own that and manage that over the coming decades, I think that's an interesting and potent way of thinking about what's happening. And there's a lot of discussions about, and this is very much an emerging area, you're starting to see people focusing on token engineering as areas to study, and how do I design the token, how do I design the token economics, how do I optimize for a balance of incentives across early developers, investors, first initial users, major stakeholders in these different networks, and how do I create the characteristics of the token that are going to serve that purpose. And as I said, it's very much an emerging space, and pivotally within this, whilst it can be straightforward to think about how you might value a token that is attached to an asset like a piece of real estate, perhaps there's a liquidity premium, but you can map it pretty directly, or even a security token that is mapped to an equity, and therefore you can look at discounted cash flow. It's another question when you start thinking about tokens as really currencies within microeconomies that have just been created out of nothing and have a very specific set of characteristics. So you should watch this space. So we feel that within this whole move towards decentralization, that there is there are subsets of waves of sort of going on from the underlying protocols. You'll be familiar, obviously, with the blockchains that, like, particularly Ethereum and the Bitcoin blockchain, and then obviously probably familiar with the ability to trade tokens. Some of you, how many people in the room own one token or Bitcoin? How many people own two? Got it. So, people can be dismissive of it, but, the ability to buy and sell these things and how that is fueling a parallel crypto capital markets infrastructure is not to be sniffed at. And in fact, I think some of what is perceived as the weaknesses of that infrastructure, the questions of compliance and transparency and taxation and custody even, actually I believe are going to become the greatest strengths, and in many respects surpass the strengths of today's capital markets infrastructure. So again, watch this space. Beyond that, and I think we need to get to the end of this and move on to the next speaker. This is not even just about technology. It's about, as alluded to earlier in the context of cities, it's about the ways of organizing ourselves. And we believe actually that decentralized organizations can be very effective at winning the war for talent. There's already signs that not wanting to get into a competition with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and in fact there's a very deep connection between the two, that there's a lot of incredibly talented people focusing on projects in this space. Critically, there's strong evidence that we can deliver better economic proposition, for example, a cheaper decentralized Uber, to users, and users will hunt for that, and that will fuel this move towards decentralization in a very large number of cases. One of the questions that still remains is, as I mentioned earlier on, how are these things valued? How much of the value in these new decentralized networks goes to users and it becomes a bit of a social or public utility, and how much can be retained to incentivize people to build them in the very first place. But we're very optimistic. There's a whole wave of personal digital utilities that create a new bond or channel of trust between individuals and the data they own and the services they can receive, brokered through their phone, but obviously brokered possibly through an array of other devices also. And that how this is architected, how this works, whether it is something that you trust and you deliver the services you want, and you're not, and this is of ultimate benefit to you, whether those services are around telling you what you should do today or telling you what medical treatment you should get, or whether, in fact, unwittingly, the system is optimized to manipulate you in a particular direction, which we know can happen, is a pretty critical question. And perhaps maybe even a binary one, one direction or another, between malevolent forces and fantastic ones. So I'm done. Just wanted to hark back to those who remember Tom Peters and say that, when we're in these somewhat gyrating and perhaps even perilous times, that focusing on the strength of the individual, empowering the individual in these new decentralized networks is probably the best approach we can possibly have. Thanks very much.